The capital city of Burkina Faso had long since gone quiet. Streets that only hours ago bustled with vendors, bicycles, and chattering voices now lay still under the glow of dim street lamps. Inside the presidential residence, lights were few, corridors hushed, the air heavy with that calm silence that comes only deep into the night. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone at his desk, shoulders squared but eyes heavy with fatigue. Papers lay scattered before him, documents requiring signatures, policy drafts waiting for his final decision. He had been working since early morning, and though his body ached for rest, his mind remained restless. Tomorrow was to be no ordinary day. Tomorrow, he was to announce a sweeping plan, an ambitious strategy meant to reshape the nation's economy, strengthen its defenses, and send a message to the world that Burkina Faso was no longer weak, no longer to be underestimated. For weeks he had labored with advisors, military officers, and ministers, carefully balancing what was bold with what was possible. The plan was dangerous, controversial even, but it was decisive. It was the sort of vision that would demand sacrifices, would invite critics, and yet, if successful, might secure a brighter future for his people. Ibrahim knew he was standing at a crossroads in history. Every line he wrote, every number he adjusted, every detail he rehearsed, it all carried the weight of millions of lives. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, breathing in the stillness of the night. His guards outside shifted quietly, ever alert, though even they were lulled by the late hour. For Ibrahim, silence had always been a strange companion. On some nights it brought peace. On others, like tonight, it pressed down on him, whispering doubts he tried to ignore. Suddenly, the silence broke. The shrill ring of his private phone cut through the quiet, jolting him upright. At this hour, his first thought was emergency, perhaps unrest in the provinces, a threat to security, or a foreign call demanding immediate attention. His hand hovered over the receiver, his mind already racing through possibilities. But when he looked at the glowing screen, his heart softened. It wasn't a general or a minister. It wasn't a foreign leader. It was a single name, one word that instantly pulled him back from the weight of his office to the simplicity of being a son. Mother. He exhaled slowly, picking up the phone. Mama. On the other end, her voice trembled softly, aged with wisdom but still carrying that unshakable warmth that had guided him all his life. My son, she said, are you awake? Ibrahim almost smiled. I am, Mama, I was working. You always work, she replied gently, a faint chuckle beneath her words, even in the middle of the night. Her tone was calm, but Ibrahim could sense something beneath it. He knew his mother well enough to hear when her words carried more than they revealed. He straightened in his chair. Is everything all right? There was a pause, a long one, the kind that unsettles even the strongest of men. My son, she finally whispered, I could not sleep. My heart is heavy tonight. Ibrahim leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the desk. Tell me, what troubles you? Her sigh echoed softly through the line. Ibrahim, I hear whispers. People in the villages, the towns, they speak of your plan. They say tomorrow you will announce something that will change everything. That is why I called. I must know, is it true? The president closed his eyes, torn. His mother was not just a parent, she was a moral compass, the woman who had shaped his sense of duty since he was a boy. To her, he was not just Ibrahim the president, but Ibrahim the child who once ran barefoot through dusty roads, the boy who shared meals from a single bowl, who was taught that leadership meant serving, not ruling. Yes, Mama, he said at last. Tomorrow I will announce it, a bold plan, one that will test us all, but one that I believe is necessary. Her silence stretched again, and when she spoke, her voice quivered not with fear but with something deeper, sorrow. My son, do you remember your father's words? Ibrahim's jaw tightened. He remembered well. His father, long gone now, had often told him, power is heavy, but never heavier than the cries of the people who carry your name on their lips. Lead them as if they are your own children." "Yes, Mama, I remember." "Then tell me," she pressed softly, "this plan of yours, does it protect the weak? Does it lift the farmer, the widow, the child with no shoes? Or does it only bring pride to the powerful?" Ibrahim's breath caught. In that moment, the great speeches he had prepared, the charts, the data, the bold promises, they all seemed to fade against the simplicity of her question. He felt the weight of her words pressing heavier than the weight of his entire office. He rose from his chair, walking to the window, staring out at the darkened city. "Mama," he said quietly, "I have thought of the nation, of security, of our strength, but I do not know if I have thought enough of the poor." Her reply came without hesitation. "Then think again, my son, for strength without compassion is weakness disguised as power, and a plan that forgets the least of us will crumble, no matter how strong it looks on paper." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, the city lights flickering below like faint stars. "Mama," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I thought I was doing what was right." "You are my son," she said firmly, her tone both tender and commanding, "and I know your heart is good, but tomorrow when you speak, do not speak only as a soldier or a leader. Speak as a son of this soil. Speak as the boy who once helped me carry water on those hot afternoons. Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves." Ibrahim's throat tightened. He remembered the dusty paths, the buckets of water, the laughter of children with nothing but each other. He remembered how his mother's hands, calloused from years of work, had never stopped feeding him hope, even when food itself was scarce. Her voice softened now like a lullaby. "Promise me, my son, promise me you will not forget them." Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "I promise, Mama." And in that promise, something inside him shifted. The plan that had seemed unshakable now trembled in his heart. The speeches he had rehearsed seemed hollow. He realized that tomorrow would not go as planned. Tomorrow would not be about power. It would be about people. The call ended with her blessing, and Ibrahim stood alone in the silent office, yet not alone at all. Her words lingered like a flame, burning away the fog of ambition, leaving only clarity. He turned back to his desk, staring at the papers once more. Then slowly, with deliberate hands, he began to tear them apart. The plan that had taken weeks to prepare, the plan meant to make history, he ripped it piece by piece. His path had changed. His heart had been reset. And by dawn, the nation would hear not the plan of a politician, but the voice of a son who had listened to his mother's call. The first light of dawn broke over Ouagadougou, painting the horizon in streaks of gold and crimson. The capital stirred awake, the call of roosters blending with the distant hum of engines as the city prepared for another day. But within the presidential residence, the air was different, charged, heavy with anticipation. President Ibrahim Traoré had not slept. After tearing up the plan he had worked on for weeks, he sat in his office chair through the night, staring at the torn scraps of paper scattered across the floor. His mother's voice still echoed in his ears. "Speak as the boy who once carried water. Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves." He leaned back, exhaling deeply, his mind racing. The event was only hours away. Dignitaries, advisors, ministers, and foreign representatives were expecting him to unveil a bold national policy. The stage was prepared, the media invited, the people waiting. He had promised them change, and yet now he would walk into that hall with no speech, no plan, only the weight of his mother's late-night call. As the clock ticked toward morning, Ibrahim made a choice. He would not hide. He would not deliver the words crafted by political advisors. He would speak from the heart. By 7 a.m., the palace courtyard bustled with activity. Ministers in crisp suits and uniforms huddled in groups, rehearsing their roles for the day. Foreign reporters adjusted their cameras. Guards stood straighter than usual, knowing that today would make headlines far beyond their borders. Ibrahim's closest advisor, Colonel Diallo, approached him as he prepared to leave his office. Diallo had been by his side since the earliest days, a man of loyalty and discipline. Yet even he sensed something unusual in the president's demeanor this morning. "Mr. President," Diallo said cautiously, "are you ready with the announcement? The nation expects clarity. Our partners abroad expect strategy." Ibrahim met his gaze, calm but resolute. "I am ready. But today, Diallo, it will not be the plan they expect." The colonel frowned. "Sir, you mean?" Ibrahim placed a hand on his shoulder. "Trust me. Today we speak not as politicians but as sons of this land." Confusion flickered across Diallo's face, but he nodded. He had fought beside Ibrahim in darker days. If there was one thing he had learned, it was to trust his instincts. The motorcade rolled through the streets, people lining the sidewalks, waving flags, chanting songs of unity. Some faces were filled with hope, others with skepticism. Rumors had already spread, whispers of a radical new direction for the nation. Vendors paused in their selling, children clapped as the black cars passed, elders nodded solemnly as if sensing history was about to unfold. Inside the grand hall, the atmosphere was electric. Banners of the nation's colors draped from high ceilings, rows of officials filled the seats, and cameras from across Africa and beyond pointed toward the podium. The hum of voices quieted the moment President Ibrahim entered. His uniform was crisp, his stride steady, but his eyes carried the depth of a man who had wrestled with himself through the night. He walked to the podium, his palms resting firmly on the wooden stand, and looked out over the sea of faces. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence grew thick, every ear straining to catch his first word. Then, with a steady voice, he began. "My brothers, my sisters, my people." He paused, letting the words settle, speaking not with the authority of an office, but with the intimacy of family. "Last night I received a call, not from a general, not from a foreign leader, but from my mother." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Foreign journalists exchanged puzzled glances. What leader began such a monumental speech with a story about his mother? But Ibrahim continued, his tone unwavering. "She asked me a question. She asked if the plans I make as your president protect the weak, if they lift the farmer, the widow, the child with no shoes, or if they only bring pride to the powerful." Silence fell over the hall. His words hung in the air, disarming, piercing, cutting through layers of political expectation. "I realized in that moment," he said, "that the bold plans I prepared were incomplete. They carried ambition but not compassion. They carried strength but not tenderness. They carried progress but not the soul of our people." Some ministers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. They had expected charts, statistics, and policy outlines. Instead, they were witnessing a man speak from a place no political script could reach. Ibrahim's voice grew steadier, filled with conviction. "We can build roads, we can build armies, we can build tall buildings. But if the child in the village goes to bed hungry, if the farmer's sweat brings him no bread, if the widow's tears go unseen, then all our progress is an empty shadow." A murmur of agreement spread among the common citizens in the audience, farmers, workers, market women who had been invited to witness the occasion. Their eyes shone, some brimming with tears. For once, they felt as though the highest seat of power had turned its gaze upon them. Ibrahim raised his hand, his tone commanding now. "From today, our plans will begin not with numbers in offices, but with voices in villages. We will listen first to the cry of the farmer before we sign any law. We will measure our success not by what foreign leaders say of us, but by whether the poorest among us can eat, learn, and live with dignity." Applause erupted from unexpected corners, the citizens clapping vigorously, stamping their feet. Even some ministers, though reluctant, could not deny the power of his words. He pressed on, the momentum carrying him. "Yes, we will defend our borders. Yes, we will seek prosperity. But above all, we will remember who we are, a family, and no family leaves its weakest behind." The hall thundered with applause now, echoing through the cameras, rippling across radios, and soon to flood televisions and phones across the continent. In that moment, the carefully prepared expectations of foreign embassies and economic advisors shattered. Ibrahim was not unveiling a conventional plan. He was unveiling a promise, a covenant between himself and his people, sealed by the voice of a mother who had reminded him of his duty. As he concluded, his voice softened, almost trembling with emotion. Last night I tore up my speech. I tore up the plan that had been prepared. Today I speak to you not with paper but with heart. And I promise you this government will not forget the least of its children. That is my vow as your president and as a son of this land. The hall erupted into standing ovation. Elders wept openly. Farmers raised their fists in pride. Even journalists, hardened by years of covering political speeches, felt a chill run through them, sensing they were witnessing something raw, something authentic. But beyond the applause, there was something else, something that spread like fire across the nation. Radios carried his words into rural villages, where women paused from grinding millet to listen. Televisions played the speech in city cafes, where young men raised their cups in agreement. In classrooms, teachers stopped lessons so students could hear their president speak of their futures. And in a small village, far from the grand hall, a mother sat quietly by her radio, her hands folded in her lap. She listened, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks, as her son kept the promise he had made to her only hours ago. That morning the nation did not just hear a leader, they heard a son, they heard themselves. And the world, watching closely, realized that something extraordinary had happened in the heart of Africa. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours of the president's speech, the streets of Ouagadougou were alive with a new kind of energy. It wasn't just the usual chatter of politics or the passing excitement of announcements. It was something deeper. It was the sense that the nation had been seen, heard, and remembered. At a crowded marketplace, vendors paused their bargaining as radios crackled with recordings of his words. "We will listen first to the cry of the farmer before we sign any law." The phrase rolled off tongues like a prayer. Old men leaned on their canes, nodding with approval. Women carrying baskets on their heads exchanged smiles. Even children, not fully understanding, felt the weight of something important in the air. In villages far from the capital, where electricity was scarce and roads were rough, neighbors gathered around the one radio in the community. They sat in silence as Ibrahim's voice filled the night sky, his promise echoing through mud walls and open fields. For many, it was the first time they felt the nation's highest leader had spoken directly to them. But not everyone welcomed the shift. In private rooms across the city, ministers and advisors whispered anxiously. The president's bold deviation had unsettled foreign investors, disrupted weeks of planning, and left officials scrambling to figure out what came next. Some feared instability, others feared the loss of influence. Yet none could deny the undeniable truth: the people were with him. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ibrahim returned to his residence. He was exhausted, yet there was a quiet peace in his heart. For the first time in weeks, he felt aligned with the very people he had sworn to serve. Colonel Diallo entered, carrying a folder thick with reports. "Mr. President," he began carefully, "the reactions are mixed. The people are inspired, but the ministers, they are unsettled. Some are calling it reckless. Foreign envoys want clarification." Ibrahim set the folder aside without opening it. "Let them wait," he said firmly. "Today was not for them, today was for us." Diallo studied him for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "Your mother's call, it truly changed everything, didn't it?" Ibrahim's eyes softened, and for the first time that long day, he allowed himself to laugh lightly. "Yes, Diallo. Sometimes the wisdom of the land comes not from books or offices, but from a mother's voice in the night." Meanwhile, across Burkina Faso, the ripple effect grew. A farmer who had nearly given up on his dry field rose the next morning with renewed determination, whispering to his son, "The president has not forgotten us." A schoolteacher in a dusty classroom told her students, "Your voices matter more than ever. Learn, speak, rise, you are the future," he spoke of. Even those who had doubted him began to reconsider, for in the rawness of his words, they found something that no policy paper could deliver: hope. That night Ibrahim's phone rang again. He answered, hearing the familiar voice that had started it all. "My son," his mother said gently, "today I heard you speak. The people heard you, and I knew you had listened." There was a pause, heavy with emotion. Ibrahim swallowed hard, his voice low. "It was your question that gave me courage, Mama. Without it, I would have spoken empty words." On the other end of the line, his mother chuckled softly, though tears filled her voice. "Remember this always. Power fades, but love remains. Lead with love, and your people will never forget you." Ibrahim closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. "I promise, Mama, I will not forget." As the line went silent, he stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, the night sky stretched above, vast and eternal. For a long moment he stood there, breathing in the cool air, reflecting on the path ahead. The challenges remained: poverty, insecurity, international pressure. But now his vision was clear. He was not just a president crafting policies. He was a son, a brother, a voice for millions. And with every decision, he would carry the memory of that late-night call that had reminded him of who he truly was. In the days that followed, his administration began to shift. Programs were redirected toward rural development, education, and healthcare. Listening sessions were held in villages, where citizens spoke directly to officials for the first time in years. Progress was slow, but it was real, and more importantly, it was rooted in the people's voice. The story of that night of the mother who changed a nation with a simple phone call spread far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, leaders and citizens alike spoke of it, some with admiration, others with skepticism. But in every conversation, one truth was clear: something profound had awakened in the heart of a nation. And so, history would remember it not as the day a president launched a policy, but as the day a son listened to his mother, and in doing so, gave voice to millions. For in the end, sometimes the most powerful revolutions do not begin in grand halls or written plans. Sometimes, they begin with a late-night call, a mother's words, and the courage to change everything.